The room was quiet, except for the rhythmic hum of the dishwasher, as I sat at the dining table staring at my wedding photo. It was taken on a clear spring day 15 years ago, in the backyard of Samantha's parents' house. I remembered how her smile, radiant and genuine, had lit up the entire garden. She looked at me that day as though I was the center of her universe. That memory used to fill me with warmth. Now it only left a cold ache in my chest. Our life had been stable, even enviable. We had a spacious house in the suburbs, 2 incredible kids, and careers that complemented each other. I ran my own IT consulting firm, which gave me the flexibility to be a hands-on father, while Samantha climbed the corporate ladder at her marketing firm. I admired her ambition and the energy she brought to every room she entered. She was the type of person who seemed to make everything work seamlessly. Until, of course, she didn't. The first signs were subtle, so subtle that I almost dismissed them. Samantha had always traveled for work, but her trips started becoming more frequent, and her excuses for being away grew thinner. A last-minute meeting with a client or an unexpected team-building retreat were phrases I heard more often. At first, I believed her without hesitation. Why wouldn't I? But as time went on, small inconsistencies began to eat away at me. One evening, as we were putting the kids to bed, her phone buzzed on the counter. It wasn't the sound that caught my attention, it was her reaction. She glanced at the screen, her face tightening for just a moment, before she quickly silenced the notification and slipped the phone into her pocket. That was the first seed of doubt. It wasn't enough to accuse her of anything, but it lingered in the back of my mind, a splinter I couldn't quite ignore. Weeks later, another incident cemented my suspicion. Samantha was preparing for yet another business trip, but her demeanor was different. She seemed too excited, almost giddy, as she packed her suitcase. It struck me as odd. Business trips were typically mundane affairs, and while she was professional, she rarely seemed this enthusiastic. As she kissed me goodbye that morning, I caught the faintest whiff of her perfume, a scent she rarely wore outside of special occasions. I spent the next 3 days spiraling. I couldn't focus on work, my thoughts constantly circling back to her. On the last day of her trip, I decided to act. While cleaning the living room, I noticed her laptop on the coffee table, the screen still active. A pang of guilt shot through me as I reached for it. Snooping wasn't something I'd ever done before. But the small voice of doubt in my head had grown louder, demanding answers. Her email was still open. At first glance, everything seemed professional, work schedules, project updates, nothing out of the ordinary. But then I saw it, a folder titled Personal. My stomach churned as I clicked on it, revealing a string of email exchanges with someone named Darren. The contents of the emails were mild at first, discussions about presentations and team dynamics. But as I scrolled further back, the tone shifted. There were inside jokes, references to shared meals, and one email in particular that made my blood run cold. Last weekend was amazing. Can't wait for our next escape. Love, Darren. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. It felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. My wife, the woman I had trusted, loved, and built a life with, was having an affair. The weight of the revelation left me frozen for what felt like hours. I read and reread the messages, hoping I'd misunderstood, that there was some innocent explanation. But the evidence was irrefutable. My wife was betraying me. And the man she was seeing wasn't some faceless stranger, he was her colleague, someone she had mentioned in passing as part of her team. By the time Samantha returned home that evening, I had made up my mind not to confront her. Not yet. I needed more information, more clarity. The emails were damning, but I wanted to know the extent of her deception before I decided what to do. So, I played the part of the unsuspecting husband, greeting her with a kiss and asking how her trip went. It was fine, she said, avoiding my eyes. A lot of meetings, but productive. I nodded, pretending to believe her, though my mind was already racing with plans. I had to be careful, deliberate. If she was willing to risk everything for an affair, I couldn't predict how she might react if she knew I was onto her. I needed to tread carefully, for my sake and for our kids. The next step was hiring a private investigator. It felt drastic, even paranoid, but I needed concrete proof. If this was going to end, it had to end decisively. I couldn't let her twist the narrative or turn this into a he-said-she-said scenario. I wanted to know exactly how long this had been going on, what lies she'd told, and whether she had brought this man into our home. In the weeks that followed, the investigator provided me with a steady stream of updates. Photos of Samantha and Darren meeting at coffee shops, holding hands in public parks, and, most damning of all, entering a boutique hotel together. Each piece of evidence felt like another nail in the coffin of our marriage. And yet, as painful as it was, it also gave me clarity. This wasn't a fleeting mistake or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was deliberate, calculated betrayal. The final straw came when I tracked her phone location on one of her supposed business trips. Instead of being at the conference center she'd mentioned, she was at a luxury resort an hour away. The sight of her location pin on the map filled me with equal parts rage and sorrow. She hadn't just cheated, she'd lied to my face, weaving an elaborate web of deceit. That night, as I tucked our kids into bed, I made my decision. Samantha had already destroyed the foundation of our marriage. It was time for me to take control of the narrative. The morning after my decision felt surreal. I stared at myself in the bathroom mirror, the harsh fluorescent light highlighting the lines of exhaustion etched into my face. The man staring back at me was unrecognizable, haunted, bitter, and determined. I'd spent the night combing through the evidence the investigator had sent me, meticulously organizing it into a folder labeled Truth. The irony of that name wasn't lost on me. Samantha breezed into the kitchen later that morning, her usual picture of confidence. She wore a bright yellow blouse that somehow complemented her cheerful demeanor. She kissed my cheek, her lips soft and familiar, as though she hadn't spent the last few months lying to me. "What's the plan for today?" she asked casually, pouring herself a cup of coffee. I forced a smile. "Same as always, work and errands. What about you?" "Meetings all day," she replied, rolling her eyes as though she were burdened by her busy schedule. "And I might need to stay late at the office again. Darren's been piling on the work." The mention of his name sent a chill down my spine, but I nodded as if nothing was amiss. "Sounds exhausting. Let me know if you need me to handle anything at home." She smiled, grateful for what she undoubtedly thought was my unwavering support. If only she knew. Later that afternoon, I met with my lawyer, Diane. She came highly recommended by the investigator, known for her ruthless approach to handling cases like mine. When I stepped into her office, a sleek, minimalist space that exuded authority, she greeted me with a firm handshake. "Ethan, I've reviewed the file you sent over," she began, motioning for me to sit. "You've got more than enough to proceed. With this level of evidence, you'll have the upper hand in court, custody, assets, the house. You name it." I nodded, the gravity of the situation settling in my chest. "What's the next step?" "First, we file for divorce. I'll draft the papers and serve her at a time of your choosing. Given the circumstances, you may want to wait until you've secured your finances and ensured the kids' stability. Have you considered how you're going to tell them?" The mention of the kids hit me like a freight train. Emma, our bright-eyed 10-year-old, loved baking cookies with her mom every weekend. And Caleb, our 6-year-old, still clung to Samantha's leg every morning before school. How could I explain to them that their mother wasn't the person they thought she was? "I'll figure it out," I said, my voice tight. "For now, let's focus on the paperwork." Diane nodded, her expression softening. "You're doing the right thing, Ethan. It's going to hurt, but staying in this marriage would hurt even more." I left her office feeling a strange mix of relief and dread. The wheels were in motion, and there was no turning back. Back at home, I began setting the stage for what I knew would be the most pivotal confrontation of my life. First, I moved the majority of our joint savings into a private account. Samantha would notice eventually, but by then it would be too late for her to do anything about it. Next, I backed up every piece of evidence onto multiple devices and stashed the originals in a safe deposit box. If she tried to manipulate the narrative, I'd have the proof to counter her lies. The hardest part was pretending everything was normal. At dinner, Samantha chatted animatedly about her day, recounting office politics and a minor mishap with a presentation. I played the role of attentive husband, nodding and laughing in all the right places, even as my mind plotted the coming storm. A few days later, the opportunity presented itself. Samantha mentioned an upcoming weekend trip for a team-building retreat. Her excitement was palpable, her voice tinged with anticipation. I knew exactly where she was going and with whom. "That sounds nice," I said, feigning interest. "Maybe we can plan a family outing the weekend after, just the four of us." Her smile faltered for a moment before she recovered. "That sounds great. I'll check my calendar." She kissed me goodnight that evening, her lips lingering just a little too long. Perhaps she sensed a shift in my demeanor, a subtle crack in my facade. Or maybe she was simply relishing the illusion of control. Either way, it didn't matter. My plan was already in motion. The day of her trip, Samantha left the house with her usual flair, stylish luggage in tow, a bright scarf draped around her neck, and a cheerful goodbye to the kids. As I watched her drive away, I felt a strange sense of detachment, as though I were watching a scene from someone else's life. Once she was gone, I began preparing the final pieces of my revenge. I printed copies of the photos, emails, and hotel records and arranged them neatly in an envelope labeled with her name. Then, I set up a meeting with her employer, under the guise of discussing a potential IT contract for my firm. In reality, I intended to hand them the evidence of her inappropriate relationship with Darren, which violated company policies. When I arrived at the office, I was greeted by a receptionist who led me to the conference room. The HR director, a no-nonsense woman named Linda, greeted me with a polite but curious smile. "Mr. Hayes, how can I help you today?" "I'm here to discuss a matter involving your employees, Samantha Hayes and Darren Whitman," I said, sliding the envelope across the table. Linda opened it, her expression hardening as she examined the contents. When she looked up, her eyes were cold. "This is a serious allegation." "I'm aware," I said evenly. "I thought you'd want to know." Linda promised to investigate, and as I left the building, I felt a grim satisfaction. Samantha had gambled everything, her career, her family, her integrity, and now she was about to lose it all. Back home, I sat at the dining table, staring at the empty seat where Samantha usually sat. The house felt quieter than usual, the absence of her presence both a relief and a reminder of what was to come. I thought of Emma and Caleb upstairs, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. For their sake, I would hold it together. The first battle was won, but the war was far from over. The weekend passed in a haze of tension and quiet anticipation. Samantha's absence was both a reprieve and a constant reminder of her betrayal. I kept busy with the kids, taking them to the park and cooking their favorite meals, all while silently bracing for the confrontation to come. Emma was perceptive as always, asking, "Dad, is everything okay? You seem distracted." I forced a smile. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Just a lot on my mind." The lie tasted bitter, but I couldn't bring myself to shatter their innocence just yet. Not until I was ready. When Sunday evening rolled around, Samantha returned home. She entered with her usual air of nonchalance, a faint smile on her lips as she kissed me on the cheek. The scent of her perfume lingered in the air, but this time, it was accompanied by something else, guilt. Or maybe I was just projecting. Either way, her mere presence felt like an affront. "How was your trip?" I asked, keeping my tone light. It was good, she said, setting her suitcase by the stairs. A lot of team-building exercises, but productive overall. She didn't meet my eyes as she spoke, and I wondered if she could feel the weight of my scrutiny. That's great, I replied, masking my disdain. The kids missed you. Her face softened, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of the woman I'd once loved. But the image was fleeting, replaced by the cold reality of what she'd done. The next day, I received a call from Linda, the HR director at Samantha's firm. Her tone was professional but clipped. Mr. Hayes, I wanted to inform you that we've conducted a preliminary investigation based on the materials you provided. Both Samantha and Darren have been placed on administrative leave pending further review. I thanked her and hung up, feeling a grim sense of validation. One piece of the puzzle had fallen into place, but the confrontation I'd been dreading still loomed. That evening, after the kids were in bed, I decided it was time. I found Samantha in the living room, scrolling through her phone. She looked up as I entered, her expression curious but unguarded. We need to talk, I said, my voice steady. Her brow furrowed. What's wrong? I sat down across from her, taking a deep breath. I know about you and Darren. The color drained from her face, her phone slipping from her fingers onto the couch. What are you talking about? She stammered, though her voice lacked conviction. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the envelope containing the evidence. This, I said, placing it on the coffee table between us. Emails, photos, hotel records. I know everything. For a moment, she just stared at the envelope, her hands trembling in her lap. Then, as if some invisible dam had broken, she burst into tears. Ethan, I'm so sorry, she choked out, her voice thick with emotion. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I felt a surge of anger rise in my chest. You didn't mean for it to happen. Samantha, you've been lying to me for months, maybe longer. Don't insult me by pretending this was some accident. She sobbed harder, burying her face in her hands. I was lonely, she said between gasps. You were always so busy with work, and I needed someone to make me feel special again. I laughed bitterly. And Darren was that someone? What about me, Samantha? What about our kids? Did they ever cross your mind while you were sneaking around behind my back? She looked up, her eyes red and swollen. Of course they did. I never stopped loving you or the kids. It wasn't about love. It was a mistake. A mistake. I repeated, my voice dripping with contempt. A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk on the way home. This was a choice, Samantha. A deliberate, calculated choice. She didn't respond, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. For a moment, I felt a pang of pity, but it was quickly overshadowed by the weight of her betrayal. I've already spoken to a lawyer, I said, my tone cold. I'm filing for divorce. You'll be hearing from her soon. Her head snapped up, panic flashing in her eyes. Ethan, please, she begged. Don't do this. We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes. I shook my head, rising to my feet. It's too late for that, Samantha. You destroyed what we had. Now you'll have to live with the consequences. The days that followed were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and emotional upheaval. Samantha tried to salvage what little dignity she had left, pleading with me to reconsider, but my resolve was unshakable. Diane handled the divorce with ruthless efficiency, ensuring I secured full custody of the kids and the majority of our assets. The fallout extended beyond our home. Word of Samantha's affair spread through her social circles like wildfire, and the judgment was swift. Friends who had once admired her now kept their distance, while colleagues whispered behind her back. Darren, too, faced his own reckoning, as his wife filed for divorce and left him with nothing. For me, the hardest part was telling Emma and Caleb. I sat them down one evening, doing my best to explain the situation in terms they could understand. "Your mom and I won't be living together anymore," I said gently. "But that doesn't change how much we both love you." Emma's eyes filled with tears, while Caleb clung to my arm, his small voice trembling. "Did we do something wrong?" "No, sweetheart," I assured him, pulling them both into a hug. "This isn't your fault. It's just something between your mom and me." Their heartbreak was palpable, and for the first time, I questioned whether my revenge had been worth it. But as I looked into their tear-streaked faces, I reminded myself that this wasn't just about me. It was about protecting them from a future built on lies. By the time the divorce was finalized, Samantha had moved into a modest apartment across town. Her once vibrant demeanor was now muted, replaced by a quiet sadness that seemed to follow her everywhere. She still saw the kids on weekends, but our interactions were limited to terse exchanges at the door. As for me, I began to rebuild. It wasn't easy, there were nights when the weight of everything threatened to crush me, but I found solace in small victories. Watching Emma and Caleb thrive, spending time with friends who supported me, and slowly rediscovering the person I'd been before Samantha's betrayal. The house felt emptier without her, but it also felt lighter, freer. The ghost of our marriage lingered, but it no longer haunted me. I had faced the storm and emerged on the other side, scarred but stronger. The first year after the divorce was a blur of change and adjustment. Life settled into a new rhythm. I focused on being the best father I could for Emma and Caleb, shielding them from the worst of the storm that had upended their young lives. Samantha's weekend visits were cordial but distant, a shadow of the relationship we had once shared. The kids adapted as best they could, but every so often, I caught a glimpse of sadness in their eyes, a reminder of the fracture that no amount of love or attention could fully mend. It was during one of these weekends, as I prepared to drop the kids off at Samantha's apartment, that I noticed something was off. When I pulled into the parking lot, her car wasn't there. The curtains in her window were drawn, and the usual vibrant potted plants she kept on her balcony were missing. Emma noticed it too. "Where's Mom's car?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. I shrugged, though unease was already gnawing in my stomach. Maybe she ran an errand. Let's call her. I dialed her number and waited, the phone ringing endlessly until it clicked to voicemail. I tried again, and again, with the same result. Anxiety crept over me like a suffocating fog. Something was wrong. I parked the car and led the kids to her apartment. Emma and Caleb followed silently, sensing my unease. I knocked on the door, then pounded harder when there was no response. "Samantha." I called out, my voice echoing down the quiet hallway. "It's me. Open up." There was no answer. The building manager, an elderly man named Carl, happened to walk by. He frowned when he saw me. "She hasn't been around," he said. "I haven't seen her in days. Thought she might have gone on vacation." "She didn't say anything about leaving," I said, panic bubbling beneath the surface. "Carl, I need to get inside." He hesitated but nodded. "Wait here." Minutes later, he returned with a set of keys and unlocked the door. The apartment was dark and eerily still. A faint, musty smell filled the air, and the sight that greeted me made my blood run cold. The living room was in disarray, clothes strewn across the floor, dishes piled high in the sink, and a stack of unopened mail on the counter. "Mom." Emma called hesitantly, her voice trembling. I told the kids to wait in the hallway with Carl and stepped deeper into the apartment, my heart pounding. I checked every room, calling Samantha's name, until I reached the bedroom. The door was ajar, and as I pushed it open, the sight inside stopped me in my tracks. Samantha lay on the bed, motionless, her face pale and her lips tinged with blue. Empty pill bottles and a crumpled note were scattered on the nightstand beside her. My legs gave out, and I collapsed to my knees, unable to process what I was seeing. "No," I whispered, crawling toward her. "No, no, no." I reached for her wrist, searching desperately for a pulse, but there was nothing. Her skin was cold, lifeless. A sob escaped my throat as the weight of the moment crashed over me. Somehow, I found the strength to call 911. The operator's voice was calm, detached, as I choked out the details. Within minutes, the paramedics arrived, but there was nothing they could do. Samantha was gone. The next hours passed in a haze. I sat in the hallway with Emma and Caleb, holding them close as tears streamed down my face. They didn't understand what was happening, only that something was terribly wrong. When the paramedics finally wheeled Samantha's body out on a stretcher, Emma screamed. Caleb buried his face in my chest, sobbing uncontrollably. The note Samantha had left was brief and haunting. In it, she apologized for everything, for the affair, for the divorce, for the pain she had caused. She wrote of her loneliness, her regret, and her inability to move forward. "I thought I could fix it," the note read. "But I broke too much. Please take care of the kids. They deserve better than me." The weeks that followed were some of the darkest of my life. Grief hit me in waves, alternating between anger, guilt, and an unbearable sadness. I blamed myself for her death, replaying every argument, every harsh word, wondering if I could have done something to save her. Emma and Caleb struggled to cope. Emma became withdrawn, retreating into her books and art. Caleb, too young to fully comprehend the loss, would sometimes ask when his mom was coming back. Each time, I had to explain the unexplainable, my heart breaking a little more with every conversation. Months passed, and though life moved forward, a void lingered. Samantha's death had left scars that would never fully heal. I began seeing a therapist, not just for my own sake but for the kids. We started attending family counseling, trying to find a way to navigate the grief together. One night, as I tucked Caleb into bed, he looked up at me with wide, tear-filled eyes. "Dad," he whispered, "was Mom sad because of us?" My chest tightened, and I pulled him into a hug. "No, buddy," I said, my voice cracking. "It wasn't your fault. Mom loved you more than anything. She had some things she couldn't fix." He nodded, though I could see the weight of his confusion and sadness. As I sat by his bedside, stroking his hair, I thought about all the ways I had failed, not just as a husband but as a partner. Samantha had made terrible choices, but had I ever truly understood the depth of her pain? Had I been too consumed by my own sense of betrayal to see how lost she had become? The tragedy of Samantha's death hung over us, a reminder of how fragile life could be. I tried to find solace in the love I had for Emma and Caleb, in the small moments of joy that still existed amid the sorrow. But the truth was, the loss had changed me. I wasn't the same man who had set out to take revenge. That man was gone, buried beneath the weight of regret and grief. And in the quiet moments, when the kids were asleep and the house was still, I would sit alone with the memories, the good, the bad, and the ones I wished I could forget. In the end, Samantha's death wasn't just a loss. It was a lesson, a painful reminder of how quickly love can turn to ashes when trust is broken and forgiveness becomes impossible. And though I would never stop grieving, I vowed to honor her memory by being the father our children needed, the one who could guide them through the darkness and help them find the light again. But the light was faint, and some nights, it felt impossibly far away.